Hi, everybody. Welcome to another interview with another fabulous past president of PMI Rochester. I'm introducing Joe Lukas, who has not just served once, but twice. Thank you very much, sir. From 1995 to 1996, and then 2001 to 2002. And from what I have learned, you have served many, many, many roles with the chapter in between. Going back to 1995, my understanding is that you are also one of the founding members of the chapter, that you were part of it from the very beginning. Can you share some of that story with me?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you go back, the original chapter, 1985, was basically Kodak. And the way that came about was that Kodak was looking around at best practices by other companies.
Yep.
And what Kodak was doing in the capital construction area was the lead engineer was also the project manager. And that didn't always work so well. Some engineers are not good managers. So a team was put in place, some benchmarking was done. I got involved in a trip to Coors to see what they were doing. The reason for that is because Coors was vertically integrated, just like Kodak.
Okay.
And they had a very robust project management division. And
Okay.
the decision was made in 1984 to form project management at Kodak as a separate division. And I was one of the original project managers that went into that division. And Randy Bakel was in charge. So he was the first division director.
Now, did they do that because Coors had its own project management division?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Did they do that because Coors had its own project management division?
Coors did, yeah. And we
Okay.
found other companies that were doing the same thing. And,
Okay.
and, and again, the point was just because you were good technically didn't mean you were a good manager. So they were trying to find the people who tended to be successful with projects and bring them into project management.
Okay.
Now, quite frankly, it was interesting because it was not well received at Kodak. I mean, the technical people, for at least the first year and a half, 2 years, it was open warfare. I mean, they would have meetings and make sure we were not invited because they thought we were. So it took a while to get some acceptance within Kodak of project management and the role that it brings.
That's quite a
But
bit of conflict to climb through.
oh,
How,
it was interesting. It was pretty bad. I mean, again, I'm an engineer, and when I was running the projects as a project manager, I would have people refuse to let me see a drawing because they said, "You're a project manager, you can't look at it." It's like, oh, wait a minute.
but you went to school for engineering.
Exactly. I'm a chemical engineer by trade. So it was a very interesting beginning. Um,
Wow. Wow. Do you find any of that still continues today? The thought that project managers just don't have enough street cred to be able to come into particular verticals?
it's interesting. I do a lot of consulting work with different companies
Okay.
around the country. And I would say in most companies today, there is a pretty good acceptance of project management. There are a couple clients that are reluctant to really use project management.
Okay.
But for the most part, I would say that the companies I'm looking at today and work with today, there's a good understanding about the value of project management. And most organizations have a separate group for project management now.
Okay. Okay. That's great to hear. Because I do find that sometimes we're the glue. It kind of brings all the different opinions together
Yeah.
into the same room. That must be what a wonderful experience to go from Kodak. How did you go from engineer? Let's back up. How'd you go from engineer into project management?
Well, again, when I started at Kodak, the lead engineer was also in charge of the project. So I did both roles.
Okay.
Now, we had no formal training around project management, nothing whatsoever.
Okay.
But I tended to do good because I tend to be very planning focused.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my nature. So I tend to do really good with that. And that's why when they formed project management, they asked me to come in and be part of the division. So those
Okay,
people that came in originally were all people that tended to do good at planning projects.
got it. With major technical backgrounds, like
Yeah,
yourself.
no, it's interesting because again, after I left Kodak, I worked for a couple engineering companies, and um, I would say in both companies I worked with, the project management role was understood and accepted, but having that engineering background was invaluable because I was still able to watch over what the technical people were doing
Yep,
and provide input on their work.
right.
So let me say this, if you had a person that didn't have that engineering background in an engineering company, I doubt they'd be respected because they would say, well, you just don't know what we do.
Right,
So,
right.
so I will say again, having worked with different engineering companies, your project managers typically have an engineering background, and that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah.
And yet there's also the coaching outside, which is once you manage a project, once you learn those tools, that they're scalable into any industry. But we know once you get down into the technical, having that some of that knowledge and that background is truly so important.
Oh, it is definitely. Yep.
That's so you went from project management, you went from engineering at Kodak into project management because Kodak, besides seeing what did something major happen at Kodak where they said, okay, wait a minute, we need to figure this out. We need a project management department. What happened to get them there?
Well, there were some, I'll call them spectacular project failures
Okay.
at Kodak. And the one in particular that I remember, they were building a new cafeteria in building 205. That's one of the buildings in Kodak Park.
Okay.
And it was on the first floor of the building. And they got into construction and they suddenly realized there's no way to get to this cafeteria. There's no staircase down to that cafeteria. So literally, you'd have to go outside to go back into the cafeteria. That's a big
In snowy Rochester.
yeah. And so they had to put a change order in to add an interior staircase, and that was a lot of money. And
Yes.
people at Kodak office were saying, "Well, how did this happen? I mean, how could you make a dumb mistake like that?" And that's what started this whole thing about putting people in place that could really manage the projects.
Right.
So that's where it all came about.
That is, I don't think I've ever heard that story. That's hilarious and unbelievable at the same time. Not having internal access to a cafeteria. Wow.
Well, yeah, it is interesting. Well, how could that happen? But
It happens.
it does. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's not unique to Kodak. Again, I can tell you stories of other companies on things that happen,
Yep.
major screw ups. And you just got to say, well, how? How?
Right. Right. And it boils down. So when you do have a project manager in place and those things happen, which they do, a project manager is a superhero to a certain extent, but there are many times where projects do fail. And when they do fail, what do you feel is sometimes the more common through line for that failure to happen?
Um, I'll give you two answers to that. Number one, I'll give it to you based on my experience working with a couple engineering companies. And what I saw there was there were some people in project management that were not good communicators. Okay. And if you're not really good at communicating, especially with the clients,
Mm-hmm.
it can be very easy to fail because there can be misunderstandings. And I had one project that I got involved in because I was actually a division director for one engineering company in charge of project management. And when I got there, I inherited a bunch of people as project managers. And I'll tell you, within 3 years, 80% of them was gone. I got rid of them, replaced them. because they just didn't have the skill set to be project managers. And
Right.
matter of fact, one of the people I brought in, Ted Bacuzzi. We had a project, and it was for a company called the Miliani, and they were hair products, and it was a very big project, very complicated. They
Okay.
wanted to consolidate their office, their manufacturing facility, their warehouse. They wanted to consolidate everything in one location in Union County.
Wow.
And they had, the problem was, again, we had to, renovate a building, build all this stuff in.
Right.
And the problem was we had one weekend to move everybody and have them up and running. All right.
Oh no.
So that you need project management big time.
That's
So
logistics.
that,
Wow.
that's what I called Ted up and says, Ted, I need you, buddy. I need you down here. And he came down and put the plan in place to make this all happen over a weekend. And he succeeded. He got it done.
Wow.
And that's good project management, because a lot of people could not have done that. And it was just remarkable because, again, the things he did, he had a fleet of tractor trailers all lined up, ready to go. It was a Thursday night because we had a 3-day weekend. And as soon as they stopped work on Thursday, those guys all went in there and they started disassembling the manufacturing equipment to move it.
Wow.
It was like a precision drill team watching what was going on.
Wow.
So it was pretty amazing. So
Wow. One of the things I wanted to go back, and I just want to make sure that we had an opportunity to touch on it. I was in New York City during 2000, during 9/11. What were the impacts, if any, up here to the chapter, to how we held on to data, the technical impacts, the security impacts, the just the people impacts during your presidency?
well, 2011, you're talking about 9/11, right? Yeah, 2001. Yeah. That actually happened. And I remember I was in Philadelphia at the time when that all
Okay.
happened.
Okay.
Um, Impact of the chapter, I don't recall there being much of an impact. I mean, obviously it's very shocking and everything.
But we're far enough away.
Yeah, but actually the interesting story, because as a result of 9/11, New York City started a project to consolidate their communication systems. I think you probably are aware, as most people are, that one of the problems with 9/11 was the police, fire department, the ambulance, they couldn't talk to each other because they're all on different communication systems, and it was a big problem.
I do
So
remember that.
yeah, so what happened was right afterwards, 2002, they started a project to consolidate communications so it'd be seamless across all the different emergency responders. And I got involved in that only because they needed an expert in earned value, because the guy they brought in to run this thing was some ex-military guy. And he came from the Department of Defense, and he said, we're using earned value because the Department of Defense uses earned value.
Right.
And nobody knew what it was. And they talked to Pace University in New York City and said,
Yeah.
well, you know somebody that knows earned value? And they said, yeah, we actually have a person, Joe Lukas. He's working with us, doing some teaching at night for us. He can do it for you. So I went in and actually worked with them, training and consulting to get them up to speed on adding earned value to that entire program.
Wow.
Pretty interesting.
Wow.
I actually, again, spent a lot of time in New York City. So, and I saw the World Trade Center literally a few months after that happened. And I was there when they were taking the whole thing down and apart, watching what was going on. And it was pretty heartbreaking to see the devastation.
And then you were part of the rebuild.
Well, part of the communications part, not the building itself, nothing to do
Not the
with.
building, not the construction, but the rebuild of spirit, the rebuild of confidence back in our systems,
Yeah,
the rebuild of connecting people with people again,
yep,
and knowing that people can connect. Being there myself, I remember cell phones stopped working. They were jammed. The lines were jammed. The signals were jammed because so many people were on their cell phones at the same exact time trying to figure it out.
yep.
So you went and found the person with the radio.
Well, the one thing I remember about that whole thing, again, I was with an engineering company at the time, Bergman Associates,
Okay.
and we were in Philadelphia, and we were watching this whole thing. And there was a structural engineer, and he was an older guy, and he was very knowledgeable. And this was after the second building was hit.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about the emergency responders going up, and he said, those buildings are going to collapse. Because he said, think about this. He said, the metal is melting. He said, those buildings are going to collapse. And what he thought was going to happen, he got it slightly wrong. He thought they were going to topple above where they hit. He thought it was going to fall over,
Right.
come straight down.
Right.
So he said those top floors it's going to fall over, and they should be getting everybody away from there as quick as they can. He said, that's going to happen.
Right.
And so I said, well, should we warn somebody? And he said, they got to know. He said that there's people up there. They got to know. They got to know what's going on. So
Yes.
why the police department and why the firemen are going up there, I have no idea. He said, but that's dumb.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. It's like, wow.
Wow. There were so many learnings and heartbreaking learnings from that.
No kidding.
Wow. Well, thank you for part of the rebuilding of that and bringing that knowledge to the chapter, bringing learnings back to the chapter, planning. I'm sure it all goes into planning and, how do we get better? What is our continuous improvement? What can we do?
Yep.
And that is a tragedy that unfortunately nobody wants to learn from that. And I'm purposely not talking about COVID right now. I don't want to bring politics into this conversation in any way. So for anybody who's watching this, that elephant has been removed from the room. If that's okay with you. If you want to talk about it, this is your time. You're more than welcome to.
No, I better not go there.
What do you look forward to seeing the chapter do in the future? We have Lori Gayshock, our amazing current president. Her term is coming to closure. What would you like to see?
I'm not familiar with what's going on with the Rochester chapter at all. So,
Not at all, not anymore?
no, not at all with the Rochester chapter. I belong to the Orlando chapter and also
Okay.
the Clear Lakes, which is over by Tampa, that
Yep.
one. So I
Yep.
belong to those chapters in Florida.
Okay.
But I mean, I still go out and do talks for chapters. So maybe I ought to talk to somebody in Rochester about coming back up there sometime.
We would love to have you. So our snowbird is officially now a southern bird. So you're officially south. When did you, and I apologize if I missed this, when did you leave or permanently make the move away from the north?
Well, I left Rochester in 2001,
Okay.
and that was tied to my two kids getting out of high school.
Uh-huh.
Because remember, Kodak was going downhill.
So your presidency was 2001 to 2002, correct?
Right. So I was working with Bergman Associates. I quit Kodak, and then I think it was like October, November, I moved to Jersey.
Okay.
Moving back and forth for the rest of my term.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of traveling back and forth to Rochester.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And in that time frame, you had the volunteer recognition dinner, you had all of the other achievements that you talked about doing as well. When were the 2001, the updates to the chapter's constitution and bylaws? That's quite a bit to accomplish from out of state.
Yeah, but again, it's not one person. We had a pretty strong board.
It's a
That
team.
was the point. So it was a lot easier because we had a real strong board. They did their jobs. Everybody pitched in. So it worked. It worked.
Wow. Well, where would you like to see these local chapters, now that you've had the opportunity to be in a handful of them, where would you like to see them grow to? What would be your vision for these local chapters?
In my opinion, one of the things that chapters should really do is the networking.
Okay.
To me, that's the biggest value. And it's for two reasons. Number one, just knowledge exchange.
Okay.
And I used to make this comment at chapter meetings when I was a president. I always would ask, who are you sitting with? How many people are sitting with people you work with? And most people would raise their hands, right? And I'd say, well, why? I mean, you see these
all this way to do that.
Why aren't you sitting with people you don't know and meet people? That's the whole point of chapter meetings.
Right.
Get out and meet people and expand your horizons.
Yes.
That's the point. And what concerns me is if you go to virtual meetings, and everybody's doing that now because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But my concern is when that goes away, people may still say, well, I prefer virtual. I don't have to drive anywhere. And how do you get the networking out of that? That's what concerns me the most.
That is a challenge.
That's a challenge because again, the knowledge exchange and also the networking helps you in your career.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many people find a job through somebody they know that can, get mention names, get them in somewhere? That happens all the time.
Right.
And so that's important. Again, pick on Ted Bacuzzi. I mean, again, great guy, but I knew him through PMI. And when I needed that project manager when I was working with PMK for that Emiliani move,
right,
I knew Ted. Ted was my man. That's networking. So that's how things happen like that. So my concern for the chapters, and I can tell you right now, Jacksonville, Florida is a good example because I do talks with them every so often.
Okay.
They used to draw 150, 200 people to a chapter meeting. The last few years, they were drawing only 50.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a big drop off. And I blame the board. Because again, the problem is if you're not communicating, if you're not getting good speakers in there, if you're not doing the right things, chapter interest will drop off. So the board's got to constantly look at it and say, how can we keep the enthusiasm up? What can we do to keep growing the chapter and make it worthwhile for our members?
Okay.
Now, one of the things we also did when I was president, we did a chapter survey. We went out and asked the members, what do you want? How can we do it better?
Okay.
And I think that should be done every year. I'm not sure if it still is or not, but it should be a yearly event for a chapter.
And you did that in 95 or 01? Your first or your second term?
I think it was 01 when we put that one in place. I have to go back and look at my notes. I don't recall doing it in 95. I know we did it in 01.
Do you remember what the most common comment was from those surveys?
One of the most common comments was around the networking.
Okay.
They wanted, get to meet people. They wanted the training of activities because that's a good place to network, professional development events.
Okay. That makes sense because that is where we meet our local community folks, and also how do we network with the chapters near us,
Yep.
And we have Buffalo right here. We have Syracuse right here. What about Canada? We're right there, right? Can we reach out to those? I love your ideas. Joe, we've gone through all my questions. The one thing is, I still think there's a through line in there. And so I'm going to come back to you a little bit later and talk about that.
Okay.
I sincerely appreciate your time. It has been a gift for me. I've said this on every interview. It's been like a master class to have this hour to speak with you and the other past presidents I have spoken with, and the rich history and the lessons learned and the amazing stories that you have to tell are so informative and educational for all of us. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. On that note, we'll go ahead and say, Have a great summer for right now. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.
Pardon?
I'm going to stop recording. One moment.
Okay. I couldn't quite catch what you're saying there on that.
That's okay. Hang on one second.